My name is Serena Walsh. I am 34 years old. On a Sunday afternoon last April, at my Aunt Rosemary's house in Oak Park, Illinois, in front of 11 members of my family seated around the same dining room table where I had eaten Christmas dinner as a child, my mother reached across the tablecloth and took both of my hands in hers. She had been rehearsing whatever she was about to say for weeks. I could see the effort in her face. She looked at me with the specific expression of a woman who has only recently understood the dimensions of what she has lost, and she said, "Your brother is going to die, Serena. He is 28 years old and he is going to die, and you are the only one who can save him. Please." I looked at her hands wrapped around mine. I looked at my father, Gerald Walsh, who was standing near the kitchen doorway with his gray jacket and his hands in his pockets, staring at a spot on the floor the way men stare at things when they are trying not to feel the full weight of where they are. I looked at my cousin Elaine, who sat across the table and who had known what was coming long before anyone else in that room, and whose eyes met mine for a fraction of a second and said everything without saying anything. And then, in a voice so quiet that the 11 people in that dining room had to stop the small sounds they were making, the shifting of chairs and the setting down of glasses, and lean in to hear me. I said, "He has already been saved, Mom. The surgery is in 24 days. I arranged it 3 weeks ago." She blinked once. My father looked up from the floor. The room went entirely still, the way rooms do when something irrevocable has just been said out loud for the first time. I did not smile. I did not cry. I did not say another word for a long time. I simply let the silence hold what I had just placed inside it. What they did not know was that I had been standing between my brother and death for 4 months, not because anyone asked me to, not because they deserved my intervention, but because I had spent 15 years becoming a person who does not let people die simply because the people who were supposed to love her had, for most of her life, looked the other way. This is that story. To understand what that moment in my aunt's dining room meant, you have to understand the household on Elmwood Avenue in Oak Park, Illinois, and the specific architecture of the Walsh family that lived inside it for 26 years. My father, Gerald Walsh, is 62 years old. For 3 decades, he managed logistics for a regional freight company called Midwestern Distribution Solutions, and he brought the same organizational sensibility home with him every evening. The lawn was cut by 9 on Saturday mornings. Church at 8:45 on Sundays. Third pew from the left, no exceptions. Dinner at 6:30. Thank you cards sent within a week of any gift. He was not a cruel man, he was a consistent one. And in our family, consistency meant that he had a way of doing things, a way of seeing things, and a hierarchy of people and priorities that had been fixed in place long before I was old enough to understand that I was near the bottom of it. My mother, Patricia Walsh, is 60 years old. She worked as a dental hygienist for 25 years at a practice in Forest Park, 20 minutes from our house, and she retired early to care for my grandmother during her final 2 years. She is meticulous with memory. She keeps photo albums organized chronologically, going back to 1983. She sends birthday cards 3 weeks before the date. She remembers the names of every teacher her children ever had, every pediatrician, every coach. She loved us both. That is not something I have ever questioned. But love, I came to understand over time, is not the same thing as attention. And attention, in the Walsh household, had a gravitational center. That center was Connor. Connor Walsh is 28 years old. He is my younger brother by 6 years. He's the kind of person who makes strangers feel comfortable in the first 5 minutes of knowing him. Easy-smiled, warm, the one at any table who remembers everyone's drink order and refills yours before you notice it, is low. He was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes at the age of 14, and that diagnosis became the organizing event of our family's life. I understood that, even as a child, a chronic illness in a 14-year-old requires attention, vigilance, practical adjustment. Our household recalibrated around it, and I never once resented that recalibration. What I did not understand until much later was that the recalibration was total and permanent. and not solely about the illness. Connor had been the center before the diagnosis. The illness simply codified it and made it beyond question. By the time I was in high school, the pattern had been running long enough that I had absorbed it as a kind of background condition, something like weather. Connor had a social function. I rearranged my plans. Connor had a difficult week. The dinner table became a place of managed concern and close attention. Connor achieved something ordinary. It was celebrated with the energy most families reserve for something extraordinary. I learned in that house how to be very quiet and very productive. Those turned out to be the two most useful skills I would ever develop. I need to give you 3 specific examples so the pattern is not abstract. The first one, I was 13 years old. I had submitted a project to the Illinois Regional Science Fair in Springfield, the only student from Thomas Jefferson Middle School to advance to the regional competition that year. My project examined the effects of soil pH variation on root absorption rates in common garden plants. I had spent 4 months on it, 4 months of labeled containers on the kitchen windowsill, handwritten data logs I kept in a spiral notebook with my name on the cover, measurements taken at the same time each morning before school. My science teacher, Mr. Dalloway, told me in the hallway the week before the competition that it was the most rigorous student submission he had seen in 11 years of teaching. He said it quietly, almost to himself, and I held it quietly the same way. The regional fair was on a Saturday in March. The same Saturday, Connor had a Little League district game. His team did not make the state round that year. It was a regular season district game and a recreational league for 9-year-olds. I took the Metra commuter train to Springfield alone at 6:50 in the morning. I placed second in my age division. I came home with a blue and silver ribbon and set it on the kitchen table. My father looked at it and said, "Good for you, Rennie." He was watching a baseball game on television. He did not ask what my project was about. He had not asked me to call when I arrived in Springfield. He had not asked what time I would be home. The second example. May of 2015. I graduated from Oak Park and River Forest High School as valedictorian, 4.4 GPA. The speech I wrote took 3 weeks and 2 complete rewrites. My English teacher, Mrs. Albright, read a draft of it during my free period one afternoon and looked up from the paper with her eyes bright and said, "This is going to stay with people. Serena." My parents came to the ceremony. That part was not the problem. The problem was the following Sunday, at the graduation party my mother organized at our house. 6 family members and 4 of my parents' friends attended. Within 40 minutes of the party starting, the conversation at the table had moved to Connor. He had pitched a no-hitter the previous Thursday in his adult recreational baseball league. My father was showing a video of it on his phone to my Uncle Frank. My mother was laughing and leaning in to see. I was standing by the dessert table with a slice of sheet cake that I had stopped tasting after the first bite, watching my own graduation party become a highlight reel for my brother's recreational sports hobby. I set the plate down and went upstairs. I sat on the edge of my bed and looked at my valedictorian medal on the dresser. No one came to find me. After 15 minutes, I went back downstairs. Nobody had noticed I had left. The third example is the one that finally broke the ground under my feet. I was accepted to Rush Medical College in Chicago on a Tuesday in February of 2015. Full merit scholarship. The acceptance email arrived at 6:43 in the morning. I was already awake. I called my parents at 7:15. My father answered. He said, "Well, I guess all those late nights paid off." My mother, on the extension, "Oh, Serena, we are so proud. We will celebrate this weekend." We celebrated 2 weeks later because that weekend Connor had friends visiting from college and the house was not the right environment for a dinner. At the celebration dinner, my father spent 40 minutes describing to my uncle the details of Connor's new job prospects at a healthcare advertising firm in the Loop. His first promotion, a junior marketing coordinator title, an ordinary professional milestone for a 22-year-old. My father discussed it the way other men discuss their children's breakthrough achievements. I ate my dinner and said very little. That was the last time I expected anything from them. After that, I simply built. That summer before medical school, while I was preparing my coursework and moving my belongings into a small apartment on North Dearborn Street, my parents took Connor on a trip to Nashville to celebrate his new job. 5 days, a hotel on Broadway, dinners at restaurants I would have loved. They brought back a Vanderbilt University sweatshirt for me, folded inside a plastic bag from the airport gift shop. I put it on the shelf in my closet. I did not say anything about it, then or ever. Some things you store not as grievances but as data, and the data by the summer of 2015 was unambiguous. I want to tell you something else about that household before we move forward, because I think it matters to the shape of what came later. Growing up, I never once heard my parents describe me to other people with the same energy they reserved for Connor. When I placed second at the state science fair my sophomore year of high school, my father told his brother at Thanksgiving dinner that November that I had done pretty well at some science thing. When Connor scored the winning goal at his recreational soccer league 2 weeks earlier, the same father had called 3 people from the parking lot before he had even gotten to the car. I am not saying this to perform injury. I am saying it because I need you to understand that by the time I arrived at Rush Medical College in the fall of 2015, I had been practicing a specific kind of internal accounting for a very long time. I knew exactly what I was worth, independent of whether anyone in my family could see it. That accounting, that internal certainty, turned out to be the most durable thing I ever built. Medical school's the process of being dismantled and reconstructed in a way that either breaks you or reveals what you are made of. Rush Medical College sits on the west side of Chicago, and I fell into it with the entire weight of a person who has been waiting her whole life for a place that will return the effort she puts in. My first year, I averaged 4 hours of sleep per night. My second year, I found nephrology, the study of the kidneys, the body's quiet architects of chemical balance, and something in me locked onto it with a recognition that felt almost personal. I had been learning my whole life how to maintain equilibrium under conditions that were not designed for my comfort. Of course, I would be drawn to the organ whose entire purpose is to keep the body balanced no matter what it is absorbing. I made one essential friendship in medical school. Her name is Dr. Tom, Amara Okafor. She is now a hospitalist in Atlanta, married, the mother of twins. She is the first person I ever told about the pattern in my family. Not to complain, but simply to name it out loud for the first time, which it turned out was the thing I needed most. Amara listened to the whole of it, sitting on the floor of the basement study room in the sterile chemistry building, with a cold cup of coffee between us and an anatomy textbook open across her knees. And when I finished, she said, "You know what I think? I think you are going to be extraordinary, and they are going to feel it in their bones one day, and it is going to be something to see." Then she handed me the cold coffee and said, "Now let us get back to the renal tubule, because the exam is in 9 hours. My mentor was Dr. Margaret Osey, the attending nephrologist who oversaw my third-year clinical rotation. She told me on a gray November afternoon in 2017, standing in the hallway outside the renal unit, that I had the most precise diagnostic instincts in a third-year student she had encountered in 15 years of teaching. She said it directly and without preamble, and then she went back into her patient's room. I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went to my next rotation. That evening I wrote her words in a notebook I still have on my desk at home. May 14th, 2019. Graduation day from Rush Medical College. The ceremony was at the Airy Crown Theater in McCormick Place, beginning at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I had been looking forward to this day for 4 years in the particular way that people who do not ask for much look forward to the one thing they have allowed themselves to want. I wanted my parents there. I want to be precise about that, because the distinction matters. I did not need them there. I had not needed them in a very long time, but I wanted them to see me walk across that stage. I wanted them to sit in that auditorium and watch 4 years of 6 in the morning alarms and Saturday nights in the library and missed holidays and USMLE score sheets and every single careful thing I had built in the dark culminate in one moment they could not look away from. That is what I wanted. I called my father at 8:17 in the morning. He answered on the third ring. I said, "Dad, The ceremony starts at 2. Are you and Mom already on the road? There was a pause. The specific kind of pause that contains inside itself the shape of what is coming. Listen, sweetheart, he said. We have been meaning to call you about this. I sat down on the edge of my bed. Okay, I said. Your graduation is the same weekend as Connor's retreat. I waited. His company is sending him to a leadership development program in Cabo San Lucas. He just made senior account director. They fly out this evening. Your mother and I are driving him to O'Hare at 4. The hotel there is non-refundable. I said nothing. Then my mother's voice joined the line. She had been listening from the beginning. Serena, honey, we will celebrate with you when we are back. You know how proud we are. But Connor has worked so hard for this promotion, and this means so much to him, and we cannot just not show up for him. There it was. We cannot not show up for him. I want you to sit with that sentence. My graduation from medical school was the thing they could fail to attend. My brother's company retreat in Cabo San Lucas was the thing they could not attend. I said, okay, Mom, have a safe flight. I hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed for 4 minutes. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not call anyone immediately to tell them what had just happened. I just sat there. Then I called Amara, who came to the ceremony. And I called Dr. Margaret O.C., who arrived in full academic regalia, hood and all, and who stood beside me for the entire afternoon with a steadiness I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I walked across that stage. I shook the dean's hand. I heard my name announced in a room full of people whose families were rising to their feet and taking photographs and calling out from the seats. My name was announced, and I walked and I smiled and I received my diploma and I walked back to my seat. No one was standing up for me. No one was calling out from the seats. I did not look for them. I had stopped expecting to find them. After the ceremony, Dr. Taum Osei stood with me in front of the Airy Crown Theater at 3:47 in the afternoon and took a photograph of me in my cap and gown. Just the two of us and the city behind us. That photograph sits on my desk today, next to the notebook where I wrote down what she said to me in that hallway in 2017. That evening, Amara and I went to the Purple Pig on North Michigan Avenue, and we ordered roasted bone marrow and a bottle of Côtes du Rhône, and I made a decision. Not a decision built on anger. Anger is loud and brief and leaves nothing behind. This decision was quiet and directional. I was going to build something so complete and so undeniable that the question of whether my parents had been present for it would become entirely irrelevant. I would build it in silence. I would let the work speak. That was the moment I stopped being the overlooked daughter and started becoming the doctor. I matched into my internal medicine residency at Northwestern Memorial Hospital in Chicago that June. 3 years of residency, 2 years of fellowship in nephrology and transplant medicine. I will give you the shape of those years in specific detail, because vague is how people make extraordinary things sound ordinary. June of 2019 through June of 2022, residency averaging 62 hours per week in the hospital. In my second year, I was recognized by the department chair as the top resident in patient outcome metrics for internal medicine. My third year, I received the Excellence in Clinical Reasoning Award at the annual residency graduation ceremony in June of 2021. My parents were not there. I had stopped inviting them. It was not a punishment. It was an economy of attention. I had 1 unit of emotional energy to spend on any given day, and I was choosing to spend it on my patients. June of 2020, 6 weeks into my second residency year, I married James Reyes. He is 36 years old, an architect, quiet and deliberate, the kind of man who arrives 15 minutes early to everything and notices when the temperature in a room has shifted. We had a small ceremony at the Chicago Botanic Garden, 22 people on a Thursday afternoon, and it was the most peaceful day of my adult life up to that point. My parents were not there. I had made the decision, after the medical school graduation, that I would not ask my parents to witness any more of my life, until they had demonstrated, with specificity and consistency, that they understood what they had missed. I sent them one photograph afterward, Serena and James under an arch of white dahlias. My mother called that evening and cried. I said, "I know, Mom." Then I asked how Connor was doing, because that is what you say, and she told me for 23 minutes. January of 2021, I began my nephrology fellowship. I found my clinical home in the first 3 weeks. Transplant. The intersection of chronic disease management, immunology, surgical precision, and the kind of long-horizon thinking that suits a person who has always played a long game. I trained under Dr. Tun, Raymond Cho, one of the most cited transplant nephrologists in the United States. He told me in my first year of fellowship that my understanding of donor-recipient compatibility algorithms was the most precise he had encountered in a fellow. September of 2021, my first research paper was accepted in the Journal of the American Society of Nephrology. It analyzed outcome data for recipients in paired kidney exchange chains. It was cited 14 times in the first 6 months after publication. Dr. Joe brought a printed copy to our weekly team meeting and set it on the conference table without saying anything. The room looked at me. I looked at the table. That was the entire celebration, and it was exactly enough. March of 2022, attending physician at Northwestern Memorial Hospital. Board certified in internal medicine. Board certified in nephrology. 29 years old. October of 2022, co-director of Northwestern's Living Donor Program. That last title is the one that would eventually determine everything. If you are still here with me, I want you to pause and drop a comment below. Tell me if you have ever been the one in your family who was building something enormous in the quiet, while the people who should have been paying attention were looking somewhere else entirely. Tell me what that felt like from the inside. And if you have not subscribed yet, please do. This channel exists for every woman who did the extraordinary work without an audience, and you are not alone in that. It was on a Thursday evening in November of 2022 that everything shifted. My cousin Elaine Caldwell, 38 years old, my mother's niece and the one thread in my extended family that had never broken, sent me a short email. The email said, "Serena, I need to tell you something about Connor. Call me when you can." I called her at 7:12 that evening. She told me that Connor had been hospitalized the previous week. His kidneys. The diabetic nephropathy had progressed faster than his endocrinologist had anticipated. He was at stage 4 chronic kidney disease and descending toward stage 5. His glomerular filtration rate was below 15. He had been placed on the deceased donor transplant waitlist that same week. The national median wait time for a deceased donor kidney is 5 to 7 years. Connor Walsh was 27 years old, on dialysis 3 times a week, and looking at 5 to 7 years of it. "Does anyone know you're calling me?" I asked. "No," Elaine said. "Okay," I said. "Thank you." I hung up. I sat in the study of my house in November with the window dark and the city outside making its ordinary sounds, and I thought about my brother. Not the symbol, not the embodiment of a decades-long pattern, just Connor. 27 years old. Managing insulin since he was 14, sitting in a dialysis chair 3 mornings a week, watching his kidneys fail in slow motion. I know what dialysis looks like on a body over time. I have watched it in patients for 3 years. I know the fatigue that accumulates, the way it narrows a person's world, the specific physical weight of it on a face. 5 to 7 years of that at 27 years old. I thought about all of this for a measured amount of time. Then I opened my laptop. I pulled up Northwestern's Living Donor Program database. I ran the preliminary family compatibility modeling based on Connor's blood type and preliminary HLA data already in our system from his transplant workup. Then I initiated a confidential potential directed donor inquiry under my own credentials. 3 weeks later, in early December, I had my own labs drawn at an independent facility across town under the supervision of a trusted colleague. The results came back on a Tuesday morning at 11:51. I was a near-perfect HLA match for Connor. 6 out of 6 antigens. the kind of compatibility that only occurs between biological siblings with a very specific genetic alignment. I was, by every clinical measure, his ideal living donor. There was one problem. My own labs revealed a finding that had been incidental and undetected, mild IgA nephropathy, an immune-mediated kidney condition. In most people, it is subclinical and manageable across a normal lifetime. In a living kidney donor, someone entering surgery to give up one of their 2 functioning kidneys and then continuing a demanding professional life with the remaining one, it was a disqualifying condition. The very organ whose function I had dedicated my career to preserving was, quietly and without drama, imperfect. The irony of that was not lost on me. I sat in my car in the parking structure for 11 minutes after receiving that result. I did not cry. I thought about Connor in his dialysis chair. I thought about what I could and could not do. And then I thought about the distinction between those 2 categories, which is often smaller than people assume. I drove back to Northwestern. I walked to my office on the 8th floor. I sat down at my desk. And I started working. I had a tool. I had built it over 5 years, carefully and with extraordinary precision, and almost no one in my personal life knew it existed. I was co-director of Northwestern's Living Donor Program and one of the most practiced coordinators of paired kidney exchange chains in the region. A paired exchange chain is a mechanism by which incompatible donor-recipient pairs are matched to other incompatible pairs across the country, creating a chain of simultaneous donations in which every recipient gets a compatible kidney from a stranger who is donating to help someone else entirely. These chains are extraordinarily complex to coordinate. They require deep database access, relationships with transplant programs across multiple states, and the specific kind of careful, patient, detail-oriented work that takes years to develop into fluency. I had all of it. In January of 2023, I began quietly working Connor's case through Northwestern's paired exchange network. Not as his sister, as his physician, as the co-director of the program through which his transplant would eventually be coordinated, I flagged his case for priority review based on his age, his dialysis dependency, and his compatibility profile. I coordinated with transplant teams at Loyola University Medical Center, the University of Chicago Medicine, and the University of Wisconsin's transplant program. I spent 41 hours over 6 weeks, tracked in my project log in 15-minute increments, running compatibility modeling across more than 230 potential donor-recipient pairs in our regional network. I did this before 6 in the morning, after 8 in the evening, on Saturday afternoons, while James took our daughter Mia to the park. I did not tell my parents. I did not tell Connor. I did not tell Elaine. What they did not know was that I had already made the decision. The question was never whether I would save him. The question was only when and how. And what they also did not know was that in doing so, I was going to give them one opportunity in front of witnesses to see clearly who they had been failing to see for 34 years. On March the 7th, 2023, at 2:16 in the afternoon, I received the confirmation from our National Registry Coordinator, a 37-year-old elementary school teacher from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, named Karen Hopper, who had registered as an altruistic, non-directed donor through the National Kidney Registry 6 months earlier, simply because she wanted to help a stranger, was a high compatibility match for Connor in a 3-way paired exchange chain. The chain had been validated. Northwestern's surgical team had been briefed. Connor's surgery was conditionally scheduled for April the 3rd, 2023. I forwarded the confirmation to our transplant coordinator, noted the file, and then I sat at my desk for a few minutes. Not to celebrate. Just to feel the weight of what had been built. 41 hours, 230 pairs, one teacher in Milwaukee who had never heard my brother's name. 3 days later, on Sunday, March the 10th, at 6:44 in the evening, my mother called. I had not spoken to my parents in 8 months. I answered. "Serena," she said. Her voice was thinner than I remembered it. "Connor is very sick." "I know, Mom," I said. A pause. "You know?" "Yes." Another pause, longer. He needs a kidney transplant. He is on dialysis. The wait list is years. His transplant doctor said a sibling could be tested. A biological sibling is the best possible match. Serena. She stopped. The whole weight of the request sat in the silence after she said my name. Please, she said. We are asking you to please be tested. I held the phone against my shoulder and looked at the window, at the city outside. Mom, I said, I will look into it. I let her believe that. Not cruelty. Precision. I needed one more piece in place before the full picture could be shown to all the people who needed to see it. Elaine called me the following Thursday. My Aunt Rosemary was hosting Easter dinner on April the 9th. The entire extended family was invited. Elaine asked if I would come. I said I would. I asked her not to tell my parents in advance that I would be there. She was quiet for a moment and then said, I thought you would ask that. She has always understood the way I think. April 9th, 2023. Easter Sunday. The temperature in Oak Park was 53 degrees at noon and 61 by the time I parked my car on Iowa Street at 1:47 in the afternoon. James was with me. Mia was at home with James's mother. I had dressed carefully that morning. A deep burgundy dress with structured shoulders, the pearl earrings James gave me for our second anniversary. I look like a woman attending a family dinner. Nothing more or less than that. Aunt Rosemary opened the door before I reached the step. She's 60 years old, and she pulled me into a hug that went on long enough to say everything that cannot be said in words. Inside, 11 people. Aunt Rosemary and Uncle Frank, my cousins, Elaine and Danny, Danny's wife Teresa, my mother's sister Kathleen and her husband Robert, 2 of their adult children, and 2 of my parents' longtime friends, the Abercrombies, who had known our family since I was 7 years old. Aunt Rosemary's good china was set on the table, the pattern she reserves for holidays. My parents arrived at 2:15. I was standing in the kitchen with Elaine. I heard the front door. I heard my father's voice. I heard my mother's voice. And then I heard this specific quality of silence that arrives when someone enters a room and sees something unexpected. My mother appeared in the kitchen doorway. She stood there for 2 full seconds, looking at me. Then she crossed the room and took both of my hands. Serena, she said. My father appeared behind her. He was in his good gray jacket, hands in his pockets. He nodded at me slowly. Serena, he said. Dad, I said. The dining room was watching. No one pretended otherwise. We sat at the table. Food was passed. Glasses were filled. The ordinary machinery of a family Easter. I ate. I talked with my cousins. I was composed and present, and entirely calm. My parents watched me across the table with the expression of people seeing something they're having difficulty placing. It was during the lull between the main course and dessert, at approximately 3:20 in the afternoon, that my mother could no longer contain what she had come to say. The table had gone momentarily quiet. She had been building to this since she walked in. Serena, she said. 11 people looked at her. We have to talk about Connor. I know, I said. He is very sick. Her voice was steady, but her hands were not still. His kidneys are failing. The doctors say he needs a living donor. We were tested. Your father is not a match. I am not a match. You are the only one left in this family who could be a match. She paused. I know we were not there for you. I know we missed things. Important things. I am not going to pretend otherwise, but I am asking you, as your mother, to please consider helping your brother. He is 28 years old. My father cleared his throat. You are a doctor, he said. You know what dialysis does to a person long term. You know what 5 to 7 years on a wait list looks like. We are not here to talk about the past. We are asking you to help save your brother's life. I looked at him. I thought about 8:17 in the morning on May 14th, 2019. I thought about the words non-refundable and leadership retreat, and we cannot not show up for him. I thought about my gown, pressed the night before, hanging alone in my apartment. I thought about Doctor. Margaret Osei at 3:47 in the afternoon outside the airy Crown Theater, holding up a camera, saying, "Stand right there." I thought about the Chicago Botanic Garden on a Thursday in June of 2020. I thought about the 23 minutes my mother spent telling me about Connor's social schedule the evening I called to say I had gotten married. I thought about all of it, and then I let it go. Not because it did not matter, because I had something more important to say. I reached into my bag. I took out my phone. I opened the email I had kept since March the 7th, at 2:16 in the afternoon. I held it for a moment. Then I read it aloud, not loudly, in the voice I use when I am presenting clinical findings to a room full of physicians. Connor Walsh. Case reference 7748B. Paired exchange chain confirmed. Matched living donor, Karen Hopper, 37 years of age, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, altruistic, non-directed volunteer, National Kidney Registry. Transplant surgery scheduled April 3, 2023, Northwestern Memorial Hospital, Chicago. Chain coordinated by Dr. Fun. Serena Walsh, co-director, Northwestern Living Donor Program. I set the phone on the table. I looked at my mother. I was evaluated in December. I said, "I have a kidney condition that makes me medically ineligible to donate, but I used my position as co-director of Northwestern's Living Donor Program to run Connor's case through the National Paired Exchange Network. I identified a compatible donor chain. A 37-year-old teacher from Milwaukee volunteered to donate her kidney to help a stranger, and her donation created the chain that gives Connor a compatible kidney. His surgery is in 24 days. He will not spend 5 to 7 years in a dialysis chair. He has already been saved." The room did not move. My mother's hand rose slowly to her mouth. My father stared at the tablecloth. My cousin Danny said quietly, across the table, "Serena." Just my name. My cousin Elaine reached over the corner of the table and put her hand over mine. She held it there without a word. My mother began to cry, not the small, careful kind. The other kind. The kind that has been held back for years behind something that finally broke open. My father set his fork down. He looked at me with the face of a man encountering, for the first time, the full size of what he had not understood. And I sat there, composed, still, because there was nothing left to say that the silence was not already saying better. After the meal, after the plates were cleared and the conversation had slowly resumed around us, my father asked if we could speak outside. We stood in Aunt Rosemary's backyard near her garden in the cool April evening. He was quiet for a long time before he spoke. "I do not know how to begin," he said. "Then do not begin," I said. "Just listen." He looked at me. "I am listening." "Connor's surgery is April the 3rd, I said. "He will need support through recovery. I can help you understand what to expect medically. If you want that, call me." I paused. "Everything else, we take one step at a time. I am not asking you to fix 20 years in one afternoon. I am not asking for an apology that covers everything at once. I am asking you to show up, specifically, consistently, over time. That is what showing up looks like." He nodded. His eyes were wet at the edges. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Serena." I went back inside. I found James. We said our goodbyes. Aunt Rosemary held my face in both her hands at the door and said quietly, "I always knew." I hugged her for a long time. We drove home through the spring evening, the oak trees on Iowa Street beginning to bud. The city spread out ahead of us like something I had spent 15 years earning the right to belong to. In the weeks that followed, my mother called every other day. The early calls were careful and tentative, like someone testing the temperature of water before stepping in. I answered when I could. I answered the questions that were easy. I let the harder ones sit until there was more solid ground beneath them. My father sent me a text message on a Tuesday morning, 10 days after Easter. It said, "Thinking about you today. Proud of you, Serena." 6 words. He had never sent anything like it in my entire adult life. I read it 3 times, slowly, the way you read something when you are deciding what it means and how much weight to give it. Then I set the phone on my desk and went to see my patients. Connor's surgery took place on April 3, 2023 at Northwestern Memorial Hospital, beginning at 7:45 in the morning. I was not in the surgical suite. I had recused myself from direct clinical involvement in his case, as is both ethically required and personally correct. I sat in my office on the 8th floor and I worked, the way I have always worked when I do not know what else to do with myself. At 11:22, my surgical colleague, Dr. James Patel, sent me a message. All clear. Excellent function. He is going to be fine. I sat with that for a moment. Then I went to get coffee. I did not go to Connor's recovery room that day. I gave that space to the people who had been present in his life in the ways I had not been present in mine. 3 days later, on a Thursday afternoon, I knocked on the door of his hospital room. He was sitting up in bed, the color returning to his face, the exhaustion of surgery still around his eyes, but something lighter underneath it. He looked at me. I looked at him. "Hey," he said. "Hey," I said. We did not say much more for a while. Some conversations happened in silence. We had both had enough of the loud ones. There is something I want to say to you now. And I want to say it with care. Because I have thought about it for a long time and I do not want it to sound like something it is not. If you are watching this and you are the one in your family who was overlooked, the one whose milestones were quietly moved aside to accommodate someone else's ordinary moments, the one who learned early that your accomplishments would not be enough to earn a place at the center of the family's attention, I want to be precise about what I believe and what I do not believe. I do not believe that what I did was revenge. I have turned that word over many times and it does not fit what happened. I did not withhold anything to cause pain. I did not let my brother suffer to make a point. I built a career. I built a life. I built a depth of knowledge so specific and so rare that the very thing my family needed most in the world could only come from me, not because I engineered it that way, but because I had spent 15 years becoming the most prepared person in any room I entered, and preparation, when it meets the moment, looks like something extraordinary to people who are not watching it being assembled. The moment in that dining room was not the goal. I want you to understand that. The goal was never the moment. The goal was, every morning for 4 months when I opened my laptop before 6 and ran one more compatibility model. The goal was the 41 hours. The goal was Karen Hopper in Milwaukee and the extraordinary generosity of strangers that this entire field of medicine depends upon. The goal was the 15 years of becoming. I did not save my brother's life to prove something to my parents. I saved my brother's life because I had become someone who does not allow preventable deaths when she has the means to prevent them. The fact that my parents happened to be in the room when they found out what I had done, that is not the point. That is simply what the truth looks like when it finally has enough space to stand up straight. There is another thing I want to say, and I want to be honest about it, because these stories are not useful if they are not honest. My relationship with my parents is not repaired. It is not broken either. It is something new, something that does not have a familiar shape yet, something that James and I are navigating one phone call at a time, one visit at a time, one text message at a time. My father called me last month to ask about Connor's post-transplant medication regimen, and at the end of the conversation he said, without preamble or elaboration, we should have been there. We should have been at all of it. I said, yes. I did not add anything to that. Some acknowledgments need to be received plainly and without decoration. He had said what he needed to say, and I had received it without minimizing it, and that was the whole of the conversation. We have a long way to go. I am not pretending otherwise. But we are going somewhere, which is more than I could have said 2 years ago. I want to say something about forgiveness, because people always ask about it, and I think the conversation around it is often imprecise. Forgiveness is not the same as pretending. It is not the same as returning to the conditions that caused the harm. It is not the same as releasing people from accountability in exchange for the relief of no longer carrying the weight of what they did. What I have is something more useful than forgiveness in its softest form. I have clarity. I can see my parents, Gerald and Patricia Walsh, as complete human beings. People who loved their children and who also made a systematic, decades-long error in how they distributed that love, and who are only now beginning to understand what that cost. I can hold both of those things at once. I can care for them as their daughter and also hold the clear-eyed accounting of what happened and refuse to allow it to be minimized or rewritten. That is not bitterness. That is precision. It is what I was trained for. I have been asked, in the months since Easter Sunday, if I regret not telling them sooner, if I regret letting them believe, for those weeks in March, that I was still deciding. I have thought about this seriously. The answer is no. Not because I wanted them to suffer, but because I understood from 15 years of careful observation that my family had a particular way of absorbing good news about me. They softened it, contextualized it, moved it to the margin. The story would have become, in private, about how Serena finally came through when it mattered. Not about what Serena had built, or how long she had been building it, or what it said about who she was. I needed witnesses. I needed the room. I needed the truth to be told in full, in front of people who had seen the whole shape of this family's life, so that what was said could not later be revised. That was not performance. That was documentation. It is what I know how to do. If you are watching this, and you are somewhere in the middle of your own quiet years, the years of building without recognition, the years before anyone who should be paying attention finally looks up and sees what you have been doing, I want you to hear this as clearly as I can say it. The work is the point. Not the moment they finally see it. The work. What you are becoming in the spaces where no one is watching. That is who you are. That is the person who will be standing in the room when the truth finally needs a voice. Do not wait for their attention to begin. You have been building already. Keep going. My name is Serena Walsh. I am 34 years old. I have learned at some cost and with great clarity that the loudest comebacks are built in silence, one careful, deliberate, compassionate choice at a time. Before I go, I want to ask you something, and I mean it with full sincerity. If you had the ability to save someone who had overlooked you for most of your life, would you do it? And what would that decision reveal about who you have chosen to become? Tell me in the comments. I genuinely want to know. And now I want to take a moment to say something to you directly. Every single person watching these stories, every person who shares them, every person who drops a comment at 2 in the morning because something here sounds like a page from your own life. You are the reason this channel exists. Revenge Chronicles is built on a single belief, that every woman who rebuilt herself in silence, who did the work without an audience, who held her composure when the world gave her every reason to fall apart, deserves to have her story told with the dignity and the detail it earned. This week's story belongs to every one of you who has been the quietly extraordinary person in a room that kept looking elsewhere. If it reached you in any way, please share it. It costs nothing, and it might mean everything to someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe if you have not already. Leave a comment. Come back next week, because somewhere right now, a woman is building something in silence that the world has not yet seen. And we are here every week to tell that story.